they want, and we are live. Welcome everybody to 3 channels are streaming right now. Pat, are you streaming?
No.
Vishanti, are you streaming? You're just hanging out. Okay,
Anybody streaking?
Anybody streaking?
That is my goal.
That is the goal. So we are streaming over at MythVision TV. We are streaming at Kipp Davis, Dr. Kipp Davis YouTube channel, and at Digital Hammurabi, I believe is set up. And we're going to hopefully discuss and go into elaborating where you couldn't on some of the discussion on slavery in the Bible with you, Kipp, and Josh talking with Trent Horn and Gavin. So I'm just introducing everybody, like getting this thing started. Dr. Kipp Davis, this is my first time hanging out with Vishanti, and we have Pat Lowinger and Dr. Josh.
Awesome.
And your job is done.
Have a nice day, everybody.
And we'll be answering the super chats, right? From the we'll be doing that.
That's right.
I sent a bunch of those to you at the start. For anyone who did watch the discussion, it wasn't a debate. For any of you who watched the discussion and sent super chats and hoping that we would be reading them and then answering questions and such, we decided it was not the right venue for it, but we've held on to them, and we're going to go through them all tonight, except for yours, Vish. I didn't include your first one because that was the one and only. That was the one and only super chat that got picked up in the actual discussion. So I don't know. Maybe how do we want to do this? Do we want to start just by introducing everyone, and then Josh, maybe you can sort of throw out there what you thought tonight might look like, and our plans and our hopes and dreams for this evening. So Pat, why don't you introduce yourself to the nice people?
Yeah, while he's cleaning his glasses. Thanks.
Very good.
So, I think you timed that. Hi, everybody. I'm Pat Lowinger. Really no one of any import. But so I'm here tonight because Kipp and Josh asked me as I guess technically an archaeologist who's familiar with some of the subject matter that we're going to be talking tonight. More generally, I guess I have some level of knowledge of broadly in modern Mediterranean context, the institution of slavery from about the Bronze Age forward through the end of the Roman period. So I'm coming here to help out on that and give some input on that. And for those who don't know, I have a channel that I don't touch anymore, but I will again in the summer because I'll be on excavation in the UK and filling that with content, but I only do it during the summer months. And I guess my credentials, I have master's degrees in ancient history and in archaeology, and currently hopefully be completing in the next couple of years my PhD in archaeology as well. So I'm currently a student at the University of Leicester.
Vishanti, can you introduce yourself?
Of course. I'm Vishanti. I'm the token Jew on the panel, and I'm in the process of getting into graduate school to study either Jewish studies with a focus on Sephardi history or full-on rabbinical school. We're just going to see who accepts me first. And I love to study the Hebrew text. I am currently in Josh's Hebrew class as half refresher, half please remember how to conjugate the damn verbs. And I love languages. I love history, and I will toss it over to whoever's next.
I don't know if we need introduction here, Josh and Kipp.
I can introduce Josh. This is Josh. Look at his lovely bow tie.
He's always a cool.
He's an Assyriologist with a PhD from Johns Hopkins University, and he must really, really like. There it is. Do you see it, guys? He must really, really like talking about slavery because now he's written 2 books about it. So
he knows a thing or two. I guess that brings us into you kind of paving the way, Josh, of what you feel was maybe missed. I'm hoping we cover things that did not get covered or were not able to flesh out for the viewer, because there was a lot. It was too much to cover.
Yeah.
In even 3 hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I had to kind of give everybody an idea about how these things roll from an insider's view. There's, I mean, the second book that I wrote is 703 pages, and it's about slavery in the Hebrew Bible in the ancient Near East. So there's a lot there to cover. And I would not in any way consider my book to be exhaustive or even close to exhaustive. So if you take that and you think, all right, well, how do we fit in 4 people talking about this topic? I had like 27 pages of notes up on my screen that I barely touched. So, you know, one of the things that I think Kipp and I agree about ourselves is that we're not polished debaters, and not that that was supposed to be a debate at all. But I feel like it can be. I remember having conversations with Kipp beforehand saying, okay, look, I need you to like make sure that I stay on track, right? And if like we have to talk about this verse, we have to talk about this passage, and if it starts to go somewhere else, I need you to help me like bring it back, right? And of course, none of this on anybody's part was intentional, you know, but it, like, we didn't even get to Leviticus 25, 44 to 46. Like, it didn't come up until the very end when I was like, oh,
10 minutes left.
Yeah. So what I thought would be useful is, you know, Vishanti messaged me and said, I have, how did you put it? Well, I'll paraphrase. I have some things that you could have done even better. Say it like that. And so,
That's
you know, we
close.
talked and I said, you know what, this would be good. I think it's good for everybody to see us being like seriously given constructive criticism, right? Because I am all about that. And so things that maybe we did well, again, things that we could do even better, things that were missed, what people that have academic mindsets, what their takeaway was. I thought that would be really useful. And of course, we could also address all the super chats that we didn't get a chance to look at. So that's sort of how I thought this might go.
I felt it was necessary too. I mean, that you were able to. I could see Josh's face. I don't know if everyone else saw what I saw. Even Kipp probably saw it. And I'm going, Josh's face sometimes was like, there was so much said. Oftentimes Gavin had a lot to unload, and there was no way you were going to be able to tackle everything that was said. And we even today will not be able to cover everything that, was discussed, but hopefully we can highlight the differences and why what they said was not persuasive as far as putting the Bible in a special category that is so uniquely different from the rest of the law codes and other examples that are out there, from the image of God, which was a huge, huge point, I think, that they kept harping on. But I'm here for whatever you felt was most important to address, so I don't care where we go with it.
I just want to point out one thing. It was a masterful display on their behalf of selective evidence gathering. Like I was amazed at cherry picking. I've never seen I own cherry trees and have yet to see that selective of cherry picking. It was pretty amazing. I have some thoughts. So
can I just throw this out there and tell me if this is too early? But like 3 years of slavery versus 6. I think 3 sounds better, but you can always find an excuse, I think, to try and make 3 not sound better than 6 in some way, shape, or form. And that's exactly what they did. And I remember interviewing Bart Ehrman, and like me and my buddy Steven, we got into the Greek and we prepared these contradictions that are extensive from apologists, McGrew, Lydia and Tim McGrew. And I mean, he was so annoyed by this interview with me. By the end of the interview, he goes, Derek, if you want to make something not a contradiction, you can try hard enough and it won't be a contradiction anymore. Meaning you can get out of anything you want. If you try hard enough, you can come up with an excuse. That's what apologetics has become, in my view.
He's right.
Just keeping it real.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that, and then I really would love to hear what Pat and Vishanti would have to say about it. But I think one of the things that maybe I can pull it up if I can remember how to do that. I wrote this question down, and I told Kipp, like, oh wait, I think, well, here it is. And I actually printed it all out as well, and they barely used it. But there was a question that I wrote that I thought this would be like, you'd have to, well, you'll see. So, is it better to serve as a slave for a longer or shorter period of time? So, you would think that the response would be immediately shorter, right? Then, if shorter, then I would say the laws of Hammurabi 117 seem to be more moral than Exodus and Deuteronomy, right? Because laws of Hammurabi 117 says debt slaves serve for 3 years. They go out in the fourth. Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15 say 6. Then, if the person would respond with, well, maybe longer is better. If longer, then the foreign slaves are apparently being treated more morally than the Israelites, who are not allowed to be treated as slaves at all in Leviticus 25, but the foreigners are able to be kept for life, right? So whichever horn you pick, right, of the dilemma, it seems like it creates an issue. And I think that's where that seems so clear to me that I didn't even want to use it, which is why I didn't. But I ended up bringing it up, like half of it, right? And it did sort of feel like, and again, I know I'm certain it was unintentional, right? But it did sort of feel like most of the case that they built centered on looking at Exodus 21, 20, 21, and 26 and 27, and Deuteronomy 23, 15, and 16, and holding those two up as their case. These two are at least slightly better. And then when Laws of Hammurabi 117 was brought out, it seemed like it was very quick where you can pluck any verse or passage out of context. And that I wrestled with. And I think that's where, I ended up sort of getting bogged down as trying to establish debt slavery in Exodus 21, which I did not.
You know what? Okay, I'm about to explode.
Please.
Let me just throw this out there. Okay, so towards the end of the debate, I started taking notes because most of us were just losing our mind in the side chat. Like Trent and Gavin excelled at immediately dodging the direct question that you asked them and then dragging your asses through the weeds for 2 hours. And right when the debate first started, I had super chatted a question, but I didn't know that you were going to read them because I was 2 minutes late or something. And Kipp ended up reading it anyway. And the direct question posed to Trent and Gavin was, can we all agree that slavery is morally wrong and or bad? That is a very simple yes or no question. And the fact that neither of the Christians were able to answer without hesitation in the affirmative was, to me, it was the end of the conversation. The answer to, hey, is slavery wrong, should be an unhesitatingly firm yes. Like in Ghostbusters where Gozer is like, are you a god? And they say no, and they just blast them off the roof. Yes. And Winston's like, Ray, if someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. If someone asks you if slavery is wrong, you say yes. And the immediate response from Gavin and Trent both was, well, it depends on what you mean by slavery. And, at the time, okay, just say that you don't think it's wrong. Be honest. Just be honest. You've already assumed the conclusion that anything in the Bible is moral, even if you think it's moral for 50 years, 500 years, or whatever. And then you're going to bend yourself into Olympic level pretzels trying to justify why it's right. And that's what they did for 2 hours. I was so frustrated right off the bat when they just pulled that out of their pocket and ran with it without getting any pushback. Like, just answer the question. You know, is it wrong? Yes or no? And they knew that was a trap. They knew it was a trap. Because if they say yes, then they have to go, well, then why is it in the Bible? And they didn't want to have to deal with that. So they just immediately steered the whole conversation away from that.
Well, yeah, you're right.
Drove me insane.
They started to kind of give nuanced examples of things like warfare and people who've invaded your land, and what do you do with those
prisons
people?
and
Things, and not just the system itself. They try to give this kind of long, almost God's dealing with humanity over time kind of thing, and then with anachronistic theology. But the whole thing, and you guys had some wonderful points along the way, but it did seem like a constant frustration from your point, my perception of what you really wanted to say but never said, because you were trying to be as decent in this conversation and didn't want it to go off the rails, because you guys, I could see it on your face. I could read your minds, so to speak, and I'm sure Vishanti could too. You really wanted to say some things, but you were like, how do I keep this a decent conversation till the end and not make this a war? Well, Josh almost did at one point.
Well,
made it a war?
Like, do you remember that part where Josh is starting to get like to the point he's so flustered, and then he's like, hold on, and he like calmed down. And I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did.
And Pat, I saw you started. I just want to give a quick example. Like, I feel like as an exercise, we could do this right now to demonstrate it. I'm going to read Deuteronomy 25, 11, and 12. And let's just do this as an exercise. If two men are fighting... I'm going to
challenge you. Read it in Hebrew first.
Okay.
I was going to say Latin, but, that's just...
and there's a reason I'm making you do that. I think you already know what it is, but go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just pulling up BibleWorks here. Oh my God, why does it have to be so small?
You're using Safari, you can make the text bigger.
I know.
Deuteronomy 25:11.
Yeah. You want to do it?
Okay. No, you go ahead.
Okay. So, do
my text is small too.
Yes.
I'll share my screen and try to pop up so people can see the English. And
so YouTube Punk in the chat says Josh doesn't have it memorized. I'm deducting points.
So if two men are striving one with another, and the wife of the one draws near, approaches to rescue her husband from the hand of the one striking him, and she stretches out her hand and seizes his testicles.
Junk.
Yeah. Let's see. Then shall cut off her hand. Your eye shall not have pity on her. On her is implied there, I think. Your eye shall not have pity.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to do that, how could we make this? Well, first of all, let's just establish it, right? Because I think this is just a primary example. And if this were coming from the Middle Assyrian laws, which has something similar, would this be held up as a look how tyrannical and violent this civilization is? Look, if a woman comes out, the term there is natsal, right, in the Hifil, to rescue, to deliver, right? To come to the aid of, you've got two guys fighting, and the wife who the other husband's winning and is wailing on her husband, and she comes out to help him, to rescue him from the hand of the one beating him, and she grabs him by the testicles. Cut off her hand. Don't have pity. Your eye shall not pity. I feel like we could probably do some apologetics here, right?
It's hard to think of something.
Right. But I mean, like, okay, so in this culture,
Oh, I could do
No.
it. You want me to put on my
Yeah, go ahead.
used to live in the deep south around all the Southern Baptist evangelical hat?
Yep.
So they would say, listen, you're ruining the man's chance to have future children when you grab his balls. So when you've, effectively murdered his future unborn descendants in advance, getting just your hand cut off is the least someone could do.
Pretty good.
Jeffrey T. Gay, I won't read it, but Jeffrey T. Gay has in his JPS commentary on Deuteronomy, like his apologetic argument for this, it's just so clear that's what it is apologetics, because the Middle Assyrian law doesn't parallel this, but it's a similar situation, is that you just have a woman and a man fighting, right? And she grabs his testicles. And his argument is the Middle Assyrian laws takes away this woman's only real means of defending herself. The biblical law doesn't do that, right? In fact, it's only when she initiates that's why she's being punished, because she's initiating the assault.
Nuts.
If y'all aren't reading this as if it's a Jerry Springer episode, you're really missing out, because that's exactly what this is describing. It's literally two dudes beating on each other, and one of them's wife is like, oh, hell no, and runs in, grabs the guy by his what.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that this sort of sets an example of anything that if we took it out of the biblical text and said, hey, this woman sees her husband being beaten, whoever started it, the guy is beating the husband, and she goes out and tries to rescue him,
Right.
and grabs the guy by the testicles to try to get him to stop, and they cut her hand off. What do you think about that? They're gonna be like, oh my God, it's barbaric.
Right, exactly.
As soon as you say it's in Deuteronomy, well,
this is a common Islamophobic trope too, is that, oh, they're going to cut off your head, or they're going to cut off your hand if you steal. And it's like, look how primitive and barbaric they are. This is the same kind of bigotry that people have today. It's not like it really went anywhere. I am laughing though. Nitty in the side chat says that this is the biblical version of the steel chair. So it's like, you used to watch wrestling. Like, she comes running down the aisle with steel chair. It's pretty great.
That's right.
But anyway, yeah, I think I thought that was sort of how I felt when I brought up the 3 years versus 6 years, right? It was like, and I get, maybe they hadn't thought about that, and so they were just kind of answering off the cuff, and that's like, I get it. But I do think that's part of the frustration that I felt in this. But anyway, Pat, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, my frustration, going back a little bit, was we talked about like warfare. Now, their example was if you're attacked by someone and they damage the walls of your city, it makes sense that you could take them, at least the men that attacked your city was what they were implying. You could take them once you've beat them and make them fix your city. Now, those of us that studied warfare in the ancient world and understand slave taking was a post-victory for expansionism. Period. You could defeat an army in the field, but the way actually victory was attained by routing and things like that actually would have been a very small number of people that were captured at the time the battle was concluded, versus going into their territories once they're no longer able to defend them and taking all their stuff, including their women, children, and all their prized possessions. So the fact of thinking, no, it's just to fix the stuff they broke when they came into our lands. We just like the apologetic framing was like almost ahistorical, like because that's not how it worked. I mean,
that's a very powerful point, because when that got brought up, Pat, I'm sure you felt the same way as I did. I'm thinking of the Canaan conquest, and I'm thinking to myself, like what Josh just brought up with the magical perception of we need to put these glasses on when we think Bible, and then other literature, it's quick to easily discredit it. That is what we're seeing. And this is why you can have guys like William Lane Craig come on and go, God waited 400 years for their sins to build, to then go in and eradicate every man, woman, and child, or take the women as slaves, but that was doing them a good thing. How far do you want to go? And that's kind of what happened. They avoided that topic, the conquest.
Right. Well,
but what do you do with it?
And we could talk about framing too.
That makes me sick.
I was talking to Kipp because I didn't watch it in real time. I watched it after. Kipp says, "Hey, let me know what you think." And I basically said, there's a lot of places that the law codes and various texts of the ancient Mediterranean are silent on an issue. Now, I will say that it appears that when something's absent, I'm not going to call them proponents, but Gavin and Trent wanted to, when it came to the Old Testament, they wanted to defer to the positive. Well, it's silent, but we can always take a positivistic view. But if it's the Middle Assyrian law codes and it's silent, we're going to take a negative view. And that's not how, whether you're engaged, well, at least if you're engaging in honest academic evaluation or historical analysis, you take either a positivistic or a negativistic viewpoint. Or, in my opinion, I think you should be unbiased as much as you can down the middle. But you can't bounce back and forth between these two viewpoints at your like and leisure, right? Like, hey, doesn't
the Bible say that differing weights and measures are an abomination?
Well, that's again.
Oh,
I don't want to get. Again.
So I actually thought that the point that Pat made, I felt in real time when we were stuck on the tooth and eye legislation from Deuteronomy 21. What are the verses there, Josh?
Sorry, Exodus 21, 20.
Exodus 20. Yeah. I meant to say Exodus. I really did, people. But because there was this strong insistence, and they really wanted us to forward this agreement that this is special, in their words, unique legislation that doesn't appear in the ancient Near Eastern law codes. And I brought up the point that within is it the laws of Ernama that has the provisions for challenging your status, or is that Hittite laws, or is that Hammurabi? I don't even remember.
I think it's in a couple, but I can find it.
So, I brought that up as a unique situation that you don't have within any of the biblical legislation of slavery. There's nowhere that provides for you to challenge your status, except, and I almost didn't believe they brought it up. They did suggest that the all piercing incident is one in which a slave can change his status. I'm like, oh my God, like, are you sure you want to go with that, buddy? But then beyond there, it's like they were floundering through their text, looking for something that might make this provision. They suggested Job, where he talks about how he needs to treat his slaves well so that they don't have a case against him, right? Well, there you go.
Why would you take anything out of Job when you're discussing law codes? Why would you do that?
I suppose they could argue that we opened the door because we offered the poetic comparison that Job makes between a slave and a worker, in terms of the slave panting for the shade while the laborer waits for his wages. But that's not it's not legislation, right? And it's not, and it's
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that was something else that I had mentioned to Josh. Is most of the debate hinged on, hey, there's 3 different categories of slave. There's a sex slave, there's a debt slave, and there's a chattel slave. And they just went all around the world arguing about the differences between the 3 of them, and whether Hebrew debt slaves were better or worse or comparable to other types of debt slaves. Y'all, it is one word in Hebrew For all three of those, the fact that we put a label or a modifier on them is anachronistic. Okay, that's just helping our modern audiences understand more about what specifically that particular slave station was. There's one single word for slave in Hebrew, and it's eved. And this was exactly what I said. I said, Josh, if you had read the Hebrew first, they wouldn't have been able to drag you through the weeds for 2 hours, because when he started reading the text in the original language and was discussing how like the word achozah got transplanted between different passages, and it meant the same thing in terms of land and inheritance and money and so forth, they literally were speechless. They could not argue against that. And up until that point, they were even able to quibble over, well, my translation says, but my translation says, I don't care what your translation says. What does the original text say? And there's no differentiation. There's not eved and then a word for like sexuality or knowing. There's not eved and then a word for debt. There's not eved and then a word for, you know, just chattel. It's the same word. And I was screaming at Simone in our DMs because we were like, get to Leviticus 25. Why are they talking about these categories when there's not any? That's anachronistic.
This is certainly Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to make a joke because I was going to tell Vishanti that Josh sent me a Ray Comfort video this last week all about slavery, and I learned there's another term. There's another term in the Hebrew Bible for slavery.
Oh no!
And yes, and they actually flashed it on the screen, and apparently it's mishparet. So if you know, Hebrew, yes.
You're kidding.
No. Are you gonna? So should I just start? So for those of you in the Hebrew dark here, that's a word that could mean like steward or like an official even. I think you could.
Yeah, like
yes.
like
but,
when kings have groomsmen, the people that are their right hand man. You know, from the beginning of the day, steward's a good way, but like first, like a counselor too, right? Like, but it's someone who's definitely a lower station. What were they called in?
Yes, Claude Simeon, the steward of Gondor. That's right.
Well, yeah.
Well, right. You know, Simone is saying, hey, there are two more terms, but they're specifically for like women. So it's like a slave, but also a woman. Like it's only gender specific. It's not like there's types of slavery.
Go ahead,
it's
Josh.
Just, well, that one's for guys. That one's for women.
I think this is really the difficulty that people like Kipp and I face in these types of discussions is that we steelman the hell in our brains out of the other person's argument. And so like when someone says Exodus 21, 20 to 21, 26, 27 is about chattel slaves, I know the arguments for that, right? And there are some scholars that hold to that position, Gregory Kirikinyo being one. And I know that Gavin has at least read through some of Kirikinyo. And so what my brain begins to do is say, okay, all right. The strongest case for these being chattel slaves is X, Y, and Z, right? We've got this phrase, kikas bohu, so because he has his silver. Okay, so that could be in favor of seeing this as a chattel slave. The problem with that, and all this stuff is sort of going on in my mind. And so what I feel compelled to do is to steelman the argument and give the best possible case against it, shoring up the things that I'm pretty sure Gavin, through no fault of his own, it's not his field, wouldn't know, right? And so, but the problem is
what's the difference between steelmanning and doing their work for them?
There isn't much. But the thing is that
I know that's harsh, but I've seen you guys take down bad arguments before. I was stunned, frankly, that like mostly Kipp was not saying a lot for the vast majority of the chat, like that. I didn't know how to process that.
There's a little also context to that though, because before we began, Josh and Kipp, like they kind of went into this preparing their minds, to not be confrontational as much as possible. Like they were trying to tame the lion in a way.
Well, I do have a comment about that, and I told Kipp the same thing. I was told this was going to be a discussion, and I didn't catch it in real time because life happened. And I'm like, well, a discussion, cool. But then I was watching it about halfway through. I realized it shifted from a discussion on one in total to one side treating it as a debate, in my opinion. It felt to me that by midpoint, particularly Trent was treating it as a debate, right? It seemed to me like, okay, you kind of want to argue. And I thought, like, again, he pulled out some of the best cases, right? If it was an academic exercise with, people that are experienced, again, bringing in anything from the Christian period forward, when you're talking about the Old Testament, I don't want to get into all the issues I have with that, but again, there's a lot of problems from the get-go. But second, like he goes, oh, well, we have like Gregory of Nyssa, right? You have one Christian source out of about a dozen, right? Like, so we look at Gregory of Nyssa and maybe the Apostolic Constitutions. Again, this is my getting into where I have knowledge. Those are like the only two sources. One's the Apostolic Constitutions, again, slavery being seen as a negative thing and it should be eliminated. But also you have Gregory of Nyssa saying it's an abhorrent practice, right? Like anybody who does it is awful. But then you start having basically an apologetics for slavery being justified in the Christian church, up through not only is it, well, it's just the way things are, so we can't change it, to, no, this is a divine decree from God. No one seems to want to defend Augustine's view of slavery being morally virtuous for those that impose it because they're doing God's duty to these people because they're of poor spirit and station, right? Like they have a flawed nature, right? No one's defending that, but they're like, hey, we got this one guy who was an early abolitionist, but then they don't talk about all of the Stoics from the 3rd century BC forward, from the Stoic school of philosophy in ancient Greece and Rome, who are saying, hey, all men are created equal as far as their nature, right? This is like the apologetic bullshit. That's what I saw it as. Oh, it's not a discussion anymore. It's gone from a, like, maybe couch as an academic endeavor to I'm going to engage in apologetics now. I'm going to pull out my best bullets to try to make it look like these other guys don't understand how important Christianity is.
Gavin literally started preaching at least twice, and I could see on his face and in his demeanor that he probably felt like he was being filled with the Holy Spirit in that moment, because he was talking about these laws where, you can't murder somebody because they're made in the image of God. And isn't that such a powerful statement through the ages that people are made in the divine image? And that's such a different thing than all the other nations that didn't think that their average person was made in the image of God. And the way he was theologizing that, I'm like, listen, this is not a congregation setting. You're talking to two academics and you're having a conversation with somebody who is probably playing Candy Crush on his phone the whole time, honestly. That's a joke. Trent was Googling or looking up answers for things that he would hear in the middle of the debate, which really bothered a lot of people in the chat because he didn't seem engaged at all. Yeah. And it was also frustrating because at least Gavin prepared. Josh, he has your book and he's read it, or at least most of it. I don't know if he really absorbed the key points, but he at least has it. And he didn't have to go Googling for a bunch of answers. He had them just ready to go. And at least from that point of view, it was easier to connect with him as an interlocutor. Yep. It was still frustrating because his answers were slippery, but...
Yeah. One comment I just want to make about New Testament. You guys were like, look, we understand as a Christian, you're going to want to pull from Matthew. We talked about that before the show too. But when I first got into the slavery topic, Joshua Bowen said, hey, here's this New Testament scholar, Jennifer Glancy. You really need to read her work, because I got to talk to her and she is a Christian as far as I can tell. And she says Christians have a serious problem on their hands here with this, because Jesus himself uses slavery. Because remember now, we're not getting overly critical. The text acts like Jesus is saying these things. So we're not going to, did he do that? Did he say that? Did he not? But the Essenes already, in light of what Pat just said, they already were echoing that this is a crime. against humanity, some, not all, but some of these Essenes were already seeming to like echo this, like, we're not into owning other humans. And this is Jennifer Glancy that said this, so I'm not the one. Go look her up and check her work out.
Yeah, it's actually in Slavery and Early Christianity. It's in her. She just issued a new edition of that book in 2024 this year. So,
but you can see why they have to nuance the category we're calling slavery, because Jesus is also using it, and you have contemporaneous, if not before, guys that are Jews, apocalyptic at that are not fans of this practice, and yet the King of Kings and Lord of Lords himself can't just outright do this with it. It just, I don't know.
Yeah, well, from a philosophical, I don't want to get into this too much, but we're talking about people that had various levels of Hellenization, right, at different times. There are two main schools of, I don't want to say two main schools, but basically, if you were pro-slavery, you basically use Aristotle and Plato and a few other people as your source for moral justification. And if you were against it, you might be able to engage some of the Epicureans and many of the Stoics, right? So again, from the really from like almost the beginning of the 4th century, at the end of the 4th century, we have a vast conflict, even in just Hellenistic thought, about whether or not slavery was permissible. And if it is it a moral stain upon a society that engages in it, right? Like, it was Zeno in his Republic that wrote, like, if I was creating a perfect world as a Stoic, there would be no slavery, period. The institution wouldn't exist, right? That seems to be a pretty big denouncement from one of the founders of the Stoic school. Again,
and yet the
early 3rd
go
century.
ahead. Sorry, Pat.
So that's it.
Yeah, I was going to say that on mention of the Essenes, and yet in a handful of the scrolls, we still have legislation for the institution, right?
Right.
In the Damascus document, it says, "Let no one attack any of the Gentiles with intent to kill, for the sake of wealth and spoil, nor may anyone carry away any of their wealth, so that they may not blaspheme except by the counsel of the Commonwealth of Israel. No one may sell a clean animal or a bird to the Gentiles, lest they sacrifice them to idol. Neither from his threshing floor or from his winepress shall they sell to them. In all his property, his slave, his male slave, and his female slave, he may not sell to them, for they have entered with him into Abraham's covenant." So, like, for the writers and the collectors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Like, this is it's business as usual,
right?
Their only concern, as usual, is to maintain, purity. So, it's just a fact of life still for these people, even in the
there's a comment in the chat that I really like. It's by Germania. Christians, the Bible doesn't condone slavery. It's anti-slavery, but also Christians. I'm a slave of Christ. I like that because it really spotlights the end of the day for the two apologists. They're not really that bothered by slavery. They're really only bothered by who the master is. And in their mind, whoever the master is makes it good or bad. So if it's a human master, they're like, well, I don't know. I don't think I'd be down with that. But if the master is, Jesus or God or whatever, they're like, no, totally. You can refer to me as a slave. I'm God's slave. I'm a slave of Christ. And that's totally fine for them. They're like, my will, not my will, but yours be done. And like, I'm going to take up my cross daily. And I don't even have a free will because I want his will to be done through me. Like, literally the same terminology. They're fine with that as long as it's God. But if it's a human being, they of course A, don't have a problem with it, like if it's God, but they do when it's humans, but B, they wouldn't see themselves as the slave. What does that tell you about their mindset going into this? Like, oh well, I wouldn't be a slave. Of course I'd be the master. Like, haha, I would treat my slaves beneficially. Like, get over yourself. It was also really ironic to me that they were going, hey, the abolitionists used the Bible to argue that slavery was bad. And like, they really went all in on it. I'm like, yeah, they also had to fight against people who used the Bible to argue for slavery. How are you not being aware that these You're using the same book to argue two completely opposite
Yeah.
viewpoints. That was the point we were trying to make by bringing that up.
Yeah.
You can use whatever interpretation that you want. You can make the book say whatever you want. Therefore, you're bringing your own stuff in automatically.
Yeah, and since we invoked Jennifer Glancy, I do want to say that she wrote another book that I think may be a little more approachable to the audience. And again, I've read it, and again, if you're going to start somewhere, I think this is a good place to start if you're going to look at it in the early Christian church. I mean, there's other people as well, but she wrote Slavery as a Moral Problem in the Early Christian Church and Today as a reflection, like basically, this is the history, this is the reality, how do we, and I think she's using we as plural to
Part of the church.
Part of the church.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get through it? And maybe that would be a good book for someone who is Christian to look through. And no, I think that's her. She just re-released that book in a new edition. Yeah, I have it. It's
Slavery is a moral problem. That's it.
That's it. Yeah, that's the one I have. I have all her stuff, and I mean, and I don't want to demean it, but like I get much more out of her journal articles. She's got 25, 30 years worth of articles in all different journals, but including SBL. So like she's written extensively on this subject, and so I just don't want to not give her full accolades that we probably should. That's just it.
Yep.
Excuse me 1 second.
Oh.
Okay, blessed be he. Why are you asking him if I'm a career woman? In fact, I don't care what your answer is.
Josh, are you
Welcome
muted?
to the Banhammer, you dick. Carry on.
Is he on my channel?
No, but
Sorry.
Josh was throwing up another good book by Harrell, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I was muted when I said that's another good book I cite.
Yeah,
from.
really good. Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you want to do some of the super chats?
I'm down. Let's want me to share-
You've
we
got
can, like,
those,
flow
right,
back and forth.
Derek?
Huh?
You've got those, right? I think I sent
Yeah,
them to
yeah,
you.
yeah. Would you like
Do
for
you
me
want-
to share the screen and go through them?
Sure.
Okay. Let me do that here. Here we go. All right. So, you want to read it?
Michael Beverly was very excited during the stream. I appreciate it quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'll read it. His first, he sent it in a few chats here. The first one, he said, before the law, God tells Abraham to circumcise his bought slaves. Genesis 17. Abraham was righteous, so why did he need a progressive ruling here? Why wouldn't God tell his chosen father to not own people? And I think this was probably a question posed for our interlocutors more so, but I do think this rather reinforces the point. Well, one of the points, I suppose, that we would take against this idea of there being redemptive movement hermeneutic, which suggests that there's this progression over time of things getting better and better by God's design, and that the biblical ethic represents the cutting edge of that progress, right? Which is just I think it's false.
Yeah, and I tried to point this out in the discussion by asking that question: how many
What would it take, right? Yeah.
what would it take? How many instances? If the idea here is that God, for whatever reason, whatever his plan requires, decides that he can't just come in and say no more slavery, right? No more owning other people as property. Then what you wouldn't expect is that he makes anything more egregious. You would expect any law about slavery or anything else that he's trying to incrementally work people into, a more progressive state. All of it would be positive, like more moral, right?
Yeah.
And because what would be the rationale I feel everything would just become incredibly ad hoc. If God were to make something that was already, a 3 on the moral scale, why make it a 2? Right? Why bring it down and make it less moral? You would expect it either to stay the same or to go up. And so that's the part I think that is really problematic. Like, I was going to bring up Middle Assyrian laws A53, which is the only law that I know of, at least in ancient Mesopotamia and the Hittites and any of these law collections, that's against abortion. Right now, obviously, this is not from our lights, right? But according to their lights, I would imagine that a law against aborting a fetus in the Hebrew Bible would be held up all the time, right? Like, this is huge.
Well, I mean, that would be based on the discourse over the last 30 or 40 years, right? That would kind of be the pinnacle of
That'd be it.
You'd never shut
a
up.
moral achievement.
But why is it? Why is it that, again, according to this interpretive framework, why is it that why is it that Asher saw fit to give this explicit, I'll read it here. If a woman aborts her fetus by her own action, and they then prove the charges against her and find her guilty, they shall impale her. They shall not bury her. If she dies as a result of aborting her fetus, they shall impale her. They shall not bury her. If any person should hide that woman because she aborted her fetus, then it breaks off. So, I mean, it's like, of course, I think that's horrific, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, from their just to be clear about that, but from their perspective, I would imagine that they would say, yes, if that were in the Bible, that would be moral progression. Boy, they'd hold that up. Why is it that Asher saw fit to give this law, but we don't see anything in the Hebrew Bible? Now, I don't think that means a hill of beans, right? I don't want, as an academic, I don't weigh that at all in that sense, right? I don't think, because that's not what that's not what these codes do. They're not meant to categorize. I mean, to deal with everything. But the point is that under this schema, that seems backwards to me from their light. So, anyway.
If I may make one comment on this whole idea, and it's not in the law codes or the law collections, but it's an observation that I made while reading Jaco Garike's work on Does Yahweh Exist? He approaches it from a textual, critical, and philosophical angle. And I'm not a philosopher. Every time a precept gets me, I am so duped by the nonsense, and I fall for the script, and I get trapped in this stupid ass argument, and I'm so pissed off at it.
I actually thought you did okay on the line the other day, Derek.
I'm like, dude, like that's how I feel like. I feel like
shit, dude, you went on the line.
I was on the line, and this guy called, and I'm like, okay, so anyway, like, I'm not a philosopher type, but I'm reading this, and this interesting observation from him was Yahweh's all too human divine social political setup, Yahweh, or the argument from polymorphic projection, which is like, there's clear cosmology wrong coming out of the mouth of God. How does he not know these cosmology, the correct understanding of our universe and cosmological things that are factual that we can fact check? Or why does Yahweh have what looks to be a second and first millennium, really a first millennium BCE political setup in heaven, just like the kings on earth? He's riding on chariots. Why is he not on a space jet or like some advanced technology? He only knows the ancient language.
Derek, don't you remember Ezekiel saw those wheels, man, and they were like UFOs? That's like crazy advanced technology, bro.
They were like the wheels,
You're right,
man.
Look, I know I'm being
wheels, but they've got eyes on them, man, like wings.
But this is a good observation that he brings up. And then the last comment I have on that, this is what makes it all too human for me. And this is what makes me want to treat the Bible equally as literature. I used to put it on a pedestal. Is, you know how many Christians say God spoke? No other God spoke, things into existence. That, Josh, I know anyone who knows any ancient Near Eastern shit is going to go, what kind of nonsense? What? Because this Marduk was literally tested with being able to speak things into existence, speak things out of existence, and then speak them back into existence to prove his divinity. Like, I see all the antecedents, the building blocks at least, for what we're finding in the Bible elsewhere. Why are we putting this on the pedestal and not saying Marduk, Asher, etc., like you're talking about? That's what I'm trying to say.
If I could, this really, I think, is the crux of the issue. Because I was reading Bruce Wells again this morning, and when people like him or Sam Gringus or Bernard Jackson, like when these people that are dealing with ancient Near Eastern law and law in the Hebrew Bible, when they're coming at this, they're not coming with this bias, let's say, that the biblical text has to be more moral, right? They're not coming at it sort of leaning that direction, even though Bruce Wells is an evangelical Christian, right? He's not coming at the text that way. And so what they do is they say, just like in lexicography, right? If we don't know what, andropotastes means, right? In 1 Timothy 1, 9 and 10, strictly from the biblical text, because it only appears once. We can go to Plato, we can go to these other Greek texts and look at the contexts and say, okay, well, this is how it's used over here, or here's how this Hebrew word appears in Akkadian as a Semitic, a comparative Semitic, and so like we can pull from other things and try to get. But when no problem there, right? When we do lexicography. But when we're looking at a law, like the thing that we got, stuck on in Exodus 21, 20, 21, 26, 27, when you have a pretty clear parallel to that in the laws of Hammurabi, well, there's this assumption, right? There's this leaning that we have to, we can't just find comparative data and allow that to inform what's going on in the Hebrew Bible, which is really interesting to me, because the ox goring incident is like it's like the example that we use to show, at least the continuity of ancient Near Eastern legal mindset throughout the different law collections, throughout the different chronological periods. and the fact that sort of gets hand waved away in order to uphold a particular understanding of who's being talked about in Exodus 21, to cast it in the best possible light. I don't know. I don't see that as being fair with the textual sources that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so Josh, the reason they do it is if they engage in the anthropological framework and they say, well, anthropology and theories of anthropology show us how these laws and these literary traditions and these cultural milieus would be shared, then they're getting into, concepts of cultural diffusion and, comparative religion and synchronization, right? They can't, because they die on that hill, because that's all us. So they have to say we can't allow it to come in, because the minute it comes in, anthropologists have explanations for why we see this, and so do people in more narrow fields as well, right? But that it's all it's they lose the minute they admit it. The minute they say, it was influenced. Yeah, because it's not.
There's unspoken presuppositions there where, according to the biblical narrative, there was like a proto-civilization from which all the other ones came. And when you look at the actual evidence from history and archaeology and anthropology and the things that we have, you realize, no, these developed organically over several centuries. And this didn't come from like a pre-flood civilization. This didn't come down from Sinai intact and then everyone perverted it. These were, contemporaneous civilizations that had laws that influenced each other. And that's an extremely uncomfortable fact to sit with when your entire theological model relies on, no, we've got the original best version. That means that
Yeah.
you're not going to be really arguing in good faith. You're not going to let the evidence lead you to a conclusion. You're going to find a conclusion, determine what it is, and go looking for evidence that fits it, and then just ignore things that don't. Kind
I
of like
mean-
with creationists.
I think Josh made a really powerful point with like abortion laws in the ancient world. Like we know by the beginning of the early part of the first millennium BCE, what we call the eastern part of the A&E versus that's more Mediterranean heading, had acknowledged the concept of the unborn as a person. Like this is like, you can look up literature on this, right? Like this is just stuff you learn. The fact that in what we'd call the Eastern Mediterranean, though, there was this kind of like in Egypt and Greece, the concept was no, unborn things aren't born yet. They don't have person status. But in Persia, at the same time, Greeks and Persians are living and existing contemporaneously with each other. Persians believed that unborn children were children. They were people, like had rights. You couldn't just get rid of them, right? And Greeks didn't. Again, this isn't argued among people that actually know the literature and the resources of the period, but it is if you want to say that where did this come from in Judaism, right? Like, well, I mean, there were times that it didn't. It was, whether or not it still is today. I mean, you can argue with that as much. But
Yeah, the overwhelming majority of Judaism holds that when the child takes its first breath, that's when it gets full like personhood status. So this is why we say, hey, abortion is literally something that we demand access to because this is part of our tradition. So Christians are like, oh yeah, Christian nationalists are like, oh, we're gonna have religious freedom for everybody, but it's really just freedom for them specifically to the exclusion of everyone else. So,
all right, I know we have so many super chats and
lots of super chats,
everybody, and it's my fault because I took us off into. It's always going to be my fault, no matter what. It's whatever the excuse is. Let's just jump into it. All right,
next
Kipp,
one.
I'm going to have you be the reader because I think these are all yours.
Maybe. Yeah,
I didn't get any on my channel,
Okay.
so.
Oh, okay. This is Avi866. Avi8RR66. I can't read. What should I read? For US $10. Says, per the Bible, God got adult men to be circumcised. This is not a God that is concerned about weaning people off their old ways. Same for the diet. Change or your friends.
Snap.
Yeah.
Oh, snap.
Yeah,
These
like
people
I'm
are
working
bright,
on
right?
I'm working on that Leviticus commentary, and it's
Yeah.
not an idea that you walk away with thinking like God's cool with you kind of doing your own thing, right? He's not going to be terribly particular about how you do stuff.
What's that
Don't light
bit
that
in
wrong
the
fire,
Judges?
though.
And everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Isn't that like generally read as not a good thing?
It's not a good thing. No.
It's all a
All
journey.
right.
It's all a journey.
Well, all right. So Michael Beverly's back with 200 Mexican pesos, and he says, if slavery and indentured servitude are so different, do Gavin and Trent feel the 13th Amendment was in error by coupling them? In other words, William Lane Craig has argued that society today would be better if we had indentured servitude, no? And that's that's an interesting question, and I would have liked to have heard what Gavin or Trent had to say about that. Because it's certainly
with
right, like it did. That's the wild thing.
Well, I mean, I know it's slavery, but I mean, it's only as a punishment for a crime, and you think that's okay? Like, welcome to the abolition, discussion, bro. Like, how do you just push? God, those guys.
And the framing of indentured servitude as something that's totally fine, really.
I mean, just debt slavery at all. Like, this is why I find this so curious, and we can keep going. But like, ask the widow woman in 2 Kings 4:1 what she thinks about debt slavery. She's not going to be like, "Woohoo, man! Now I don't have those mouths to feed anymore." Glad that master's coming to take care of my kids, man. This is thank you, Jesus, right? You don't get any of that.
Oh, I got like 12. Get rid of one. It's like 10 too many.
Okay, I'm plowing forward here. Michael Beverly from 100 Mexican pesos said, can we just get them to admit chattel slavery is clearly allowed and regulated in the Old Testament? Obviously, clearly, undeniably. And that apologists, Craig, Turek, etc., are lying. And honestly, this was my goal for this discussion. All I wanted coming out of this was some acknowledgement that, yeah, when it comes to the Hebrew Bible, there's slavery, guys. It's there. It's regulated, and it's forwarded as part of the economic reality that makes the system work. And I don't know, Josh. I mean, I kind of feel like that's an admittance that maybe we did get through the discussion. I was maybe a little bit surprised that. No, go ahead, Pat.
I was going to say they came to it, but it was grudgingly. Like they didn't start that. I mean, it was towards the end, but I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So, mission accomplished? I don't know.
No, I just want to add one thing to that. Like, when you think about like Trent's answer concerning slavery, whatever category, it was like, well, it was okay for that time because that's what they were familiar with when God was just weaning them off of it. And it's a progressive revelation and all this stuff. And it's like, wait. Is it okay that they're doing things that their neighbors are doing or not? Because God was really specific about not syncretizing? Being syncretic with their ritual practices and doing idolatry and dressing like other people. He was very not okay with that. But then when it comes to slavery, they've got to be weaned off. But like in terms of everything else, you can't do what the other nations do. So there's repeated phrasing, in fact, that like I took you out of Egypt and you're not to be like everybody else. And like, so when specifically did slavery stop being okay?
Say nothing about, the Exodus and the conquest and stuff. Has anybody actually read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah? Because this is all about the painful process of this radical break from cultural accommodation. Right? Like this is it. We have to make the hard decisions if we are to maintain the purity of our identity here. So I mean you're right on point there, Vishanti. Shall I read another one here from Avi 8R66 for US $10 said a slave owner with legal process for converting a temporary slave to a permanent slave would 100% take advantage of it, right? As a bonus, they get a breeding pair to make more permanent slaves. And this comes up in the literature, as Josh has pointed out. Lots of the current discussion about this is that this law is all about what's the word? It's all about sexual utility, right? So, is this the next one?
Just real quick on that. Like,
yeah.
I'm jumping into like Egypt and ancient Greece and Rome. Like these aren't foreign concepts in those cultures either.
No.
The idea that like when you're getting ready to leave and you're going to be provided with these things in order to stay, let your kids stay. There may have been like in Rome, like contracts for manumission. Like, hey, I'll keep working for you. My kids get to go free, or I'm going to work free for an additional period of time, get to go free. In Egypt, although there's not as extensive legal codes, but individual contracts that have survived from the New Kingdom period would be like, I'll stay your slave if I go from being agricultural to household, like a raise in relative station, I'll stay with the understanding that my children will be slaves, but their children won't. Like there were all kinds of permutations underneath like a concept of legal contract that had to do with this, like saying, I'll continue to be your slave, but can I have a separate house and my house be nicer? I get a larger food ration, maybe even get some money paid to me as a stipend in addition to being a slave. So just like this is a broad topic that Josh is talking about throughout the Mediterranean and ancient Near East, where there is a point where you're kind of like, there's an enticement to stay if you can get additional benefits or acknowledgments, right? So let's just say it's not like just a simple, like you stay or you don't stay. There was quite a bit to consider.
Josh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and this is really anybody that's listening, when we're thinking about this progressive incremental movement forward, whatever, the key here is to read broadly. And I think a good place to do that is in these ancient Near Eastern law collections. Because what you're going to see, if you take a topic, I did it with adultery and rape, the laws on adultery and rape, and just read all the law collections looking for laws on adultery and rape, you're going to get to a point where you go into you start at Ornama, go to Lipit Ishtar, go to Shnuna, go to Hammurabi, the Middle Syrian laws, and you're going to get to the Bible, and you're going to be like, okay, I mean, like you could move these around, right? I mean, like you're just going to find out, does she have agency? Is she married? Is she betrothed? Is she a slave? Like, these are the things that matter, right? Did she put up a fight? Did she call out? Like, these are the things that are going to matter. And there's just consistency. And what frustrates me, I think, is that when you see this broad consistency throughout the law collections, and people like Bruce Wells and Ray Westbrook are writing and saying, yeah, there's this like broad legal mindset that's just consistent all throughout. Yeah. And then you go, but wait, we need to find this law and that law and see how they're better. And I'm not suggesting that that was overly simplistic of me, but the point is that I think we need to interpret through the lens of this overall consistency and assume overall consistency where there's ambiguity, as opposed to there's ambiguity, it must be better. That's the big issue that I have here.
And there's points of comparison between what's in a law code and individual projections, like an individual writing from like one person. Like in Egypt, we have, from the New Kingdom period, we have at least one, and arguably more than that, projections of prominent people saying, I didn't use a slave to produce more slaves or offspring. That was seen as like, I'm a righteous person because I had a wife. My wife produced my heirs. I didn't use a concubine, and through that, I didn't produce more slaves. Like, that was, again, it's not a negative confession, but it's one of these kind of like moral acknowledgments of character. Like, my life was this, and I didn't do these things because I'm morally better. So even with Egypt, there's tensions on should, quote unquote, moral people produce future slaves through sexual intercourse with their own slaves. And some Egyptians said, yeah, actually, you shouldn't. Like, that's kind of a detestable act. But is that, that's 12th century BCE, 11th century BCE, 13th century BCE. Are we going to start comparing these individual projections of moral superiority? No, just some Egyptians thought this was a practice that should be avoided. Some thought it was acceptable. So tension within that society was broad, right? You just can't.
Wait, you mean people have different opinions even within the same society? Is that what you're saying, Pat?
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's wild.
I can't believe. I don't know.
All right. Tommy Stewart for $4.99 said just a little donation to get Dr. Josh to stop apologizing for talking too much every time he's interviewed. All right. We love it. We love it, dude. We love it. Everyone loves it, Josh. Are you sure you're not a Canadian?
Okay.
I think you should adopt him.
Yeah.
Make him an honorary Canadian.
I'll make him an honorary. Yeah, I think that's the only way to get into this country, honestly.
I think that's why that's one of my favorite parts of Mystery Science Theater, right? Oh, I wish I were back in old Canada, a land which I never shall lampoon. Okay.
All right.
Next question.
Yep.
Oh.
YouTube poll.
All right. Yes. Question. Oh, this is for Trent. If my neighbor said we should be able to buy people as property and beat them, would Trent consider my neighbor pro-slavery or anti-slavery?
It's almost like the questions, because they see how much dodging and kind of nuance. It's like you almost have to make it so ridiculous of a question that it's so straightforward for them to get it.
Yeah, and the other thing, this is reminding me of something both of them kept saying, was they're talking about punishment. They're like, they were against punishment. No, they were talking about severe bodily injury. the loss of a tooth and the loss of the eye were considered severe bodily harm, not just injury. Like, I fall down, skin my knee, that's injury. These are legal concepts that would be on the par. Like if you break their arm, you crush their hand, like you tear out their eye, or you knock out teeth. By the way, knocking out teeth by modern standards is something that's not considered that big a deal. But in the ancient world, you didn't get implants.
Yeah.
I mean, it was gone. When it got knocked out, it was it,
gone.
right?
The fact that they were trying to minimize that made me realize, like, neither of those guys have ever been in a fight. Because you know how hard you have to hit somebody to knock a tooth out? Do you know how hard you have to hit somebody to knock an eyeball out of their head?
Well, so I don't want to get into, like, I just read a really cool paper on medicine in the ancient world. Part of the reason I find, like, tooths now so fascinating is there was a high level of theft from tooth infection. Someone knocks out your tooth, there's a chance you could die. Like,
yes.
Like there's the reality that, hey, you get an abscess in your mouth, you die.
I get a fever sometimes when I've had them extracted. So yeah, that could be the case.
And so these are severe injuries. Yeah.
This is why Appendix B is in. That's why I put Appendix B in the second edition, because of this very thing, right? People like Mike Winger. I know, I don't know why his voice always comes to mind when I think about this, but something as little as knocking out a tooth. If you just look at the law collections and look at how severe a penalty was incurred by damaging a tooth or an eye, like, it puts it to bed.
Yep.
It's a big deal. It's not a little thing.
Yeah, it is.
Like YouTube Punk says in the chat, doesn't anybody remember Oregon Trail? Like the littlest thing, you got dysentery.
Right. But if I walked up in today's world and wanted to win a competition, say in competitive skating, and broke Josh's knee, the chances of Josh recovering from that injury and going on to be okay with modern medicine, I wouldn't say it's trivial. But if I broke Josh's knee in antiquity, he may never walk again.
Hey, Nancy Kerrigan did it.
I was literally about to say, slow down, Jeff Galooly.
Hey, Vish, you want to read the next one?
Oh, God, Gavin. This was for $2. Slavery is impossible, actually. How despicable.
Did he actually say that?
What
did he actually say that?
I can't believe y'all let this slide, by the way. So when Kipp asked me how you did, the first thing I said was I was disappointed. And this is one of the reasons why. Gavin quoted somebody. It may have been a scholar. I doubt it, but it was probably just a theologian. And his argument was essentially that because all humans are made in the image of God, that we're technically all free and we're just God's property anyway. So, like, slavery is really kind of impossible when you think about it. That argument made my stomach turn inside out. I almost projectile vomited all over the monitor. Seriously. I've heard a lot of shit come out of apologists' mouths over the years. That one might have been one of the top 3 worst.
Okay, now I have to go back and watch it.
How do you pull up to a debate on whether biblical slavery is, like, moral or immoral or right or wrong, and then go, well, when you think about it, this one guy said that, like, technically there's no such thing as slavery, actually, so checkmate, atheists.
Yep.
But this is one of the sort of insidious parts, and I think Jennifer Glancy goes into it in a fair amount of detail, but certainly also Ronald Charles in his work on slave bodies, right? Is when you part of this whole Galatians 3:28, neither male nor female, slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, I did that in the wrong order, sorry, but the point is that when you start to tell people, emphasize to people, we're all equal spiritually, and spiritually is what matters. That can sound really great, right? Oh yeah, but
it's horrifying.
It's horrifying,
right?
Because then it allows the person to think, well, it doesn't matter if I
it
get
doesn't matter. Nothing
right?
in the physical world that matters, right? Yeah. No.
And so, like, it becomes this double-edged sword. So anyway,
wow.
Yeah. This just pointing out something interesting with apocalypticism is how, when it fails, how we spiritualize. It's an interesting thing for me to just think about what you just said in light of no real world actual change occurred. There was no rescuing of God's people. The kingdom did not come. The end of all wickedness, death, suffering, tears, none of that's gone. So there's some groups seem to try to spiritualize and reconcile this stuff, even within the New Testament. And yet now we can still own slaves, but the kingdom's in us. And now you're redefining things. So the expectation, I mean, most of the church expected a future thing, even though it failed. It's a sad thing. It's a sad thing to think about. The whole thing you just described makes me go, oh my God, there's so much to talk about there. I'll never stop.
Yeah, you could do entire live streams 2 hours a pop on just that.
Exactly. Oh gosh.
Really.
You could.
All right, go ahead.
But to keep this under 2, let's continue. Michael Beverly for another 100 Mexican pesos said, time to get to the super chats before they circle back around and start repeating that Bible slavery was better than other slavery. So don't look behind the curtain. Don't pay attention to that man. We're a little late on getting to the super chats, Michael. I'm sorry, but we got there. I think there was another one here that Vish clipped that doesn't show up.
Oh yeah, those others who like.
Yeah. So I've got one here from Heng Fashi, who's one of my patrons actually. He sent in one for $20 and said, "Can we truly have equal rights and justice, our highest ideals, while we still uphold faiths that enshrine our basest natures? Yahweh himself takes a share of virgin girls as war booty. There's Abram, Hagar, Bathsheba, on and on." Well, I mean, this is why there's apologetics, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Also, you don't know anything about like rabbinic Judaism without telling me that you don't know anything about rabbinic Judaism. Like, we've had these conversations centuries ago, and long ago came to the conclusion, you know what? Slavery, we're not down. Let's not do that. Stoning your kids? Nah, not so much. We've already like beaten you to the punch on that one, Christian apologists. So like, you're welcome to be like perpetually 13 to 1500 years behind, but you might not want to be because it looks real bad. Just saying. Like the whole idea that you could never question God, that you could never look at something and go, are you kidding me with this? Like, you really paint yourself into a corner with that. And I feel like it's to your detriment, you know, as a system to not do that. That's a whole soapbox for another time, but just listening to them die on the hill of slavery, like, I can't believe of all the hills to die on, you want to die on that one. Just
it's a surprising hill. Right.
Cringy.
So I think we got like 3 more here. My friend Lawrence over at Milwaukee Atheist sent in $5 and said, just wanted to say that everyone is doing a great job keeping it civil, and I'm glad Kipp has reached the next level of bearded wizard.
Indeed.
Oh, I used to have a wizard hat, you know. I don't know what happened to it. But, yeah. Anyways, sorry. Vish, you sent another one in. You want to read that one?
Oh, yeah. This is the time where my edible had kicked in, and I was just so upset that I'm, like, rage super chatting by that point. So just full disclosure there. Yeah, my super chat for $10 was, neither Christian is answering simple questions. The dodging and dishonesty is infuriating. Ask about debt slavery, they shift to chattel slavery. Well, are you asking them about 3 years or 6 years? Which one's better? But the Bible gave them gifts. Like, it's only less bad, like, as an okay metric when it benefits the Bible. And then I put a chicken emoji because that's how I saw them in that moment. Big chickens.
And again, the quote unquote Hebrew text is not being abnormal here. Many ancient societies, Greeks, Romans, and others said, hey, when these people leave you, the Romans had a system that basically you have to give them money while they're in employment. They get small amounts of wages so that when they leave, guess what? They have some money with them. You couldn't just send a slave out destitute. Like you're actually in the Roman system is against the law to do so. Like, because they didn't want them becoming indigent and turning to thievery and other things, right? Like these are the kind of things that we could have talked about slavery broadly. And I think maybe, but if you want to say that we have this divine scripture that's going to get it right and be better than the others, I don't see it. And I did want to mention it because in my notes, because I mentioned Kipp, they kept jumping around chronologically too. You can't discuss Christianity in the early Christian church, slavery in the early Christian church, then want to jump into the covenant code, then jump into what we know are later textual developments within the Old Testament, Hebrew scriptures, and then jump back and forth. And hey, but I'm also going to jump into the New Testament to recontextualize this stuff. Stick with a chronological framework. We're going to talk about the development.
This was, yeah.
Yeah.
This was a very frustrating thing to me, and I think I might have mentioned something about it actually in the discussion.
You did.
Where there's all these source critical, diachronic, historical critical issues pertaining to the text themselves that make this question so frustrating to grapple with. And why it's important that we not just treat the text univocally, right? At least until you're getting I think I don't know if that was a mistake or not. Right at the get-go, Josh and I both kind of agreed that entering a discussion like this, I'm fine if Christians want to pound away on Genesis 1:26 and 27 and the image of God as a means to affirm human dignity. Go ahead, do that all goddamn day. But before you get there, let's at first understand what that text meant when it was written, and let's do the hard work of grappling with how ancient texts work and are recontextualized and reread and re-understood over the long course of time.
Yep.
Well said.
The image of God could be countered by the mark of Cain, like we talked about that, Kipp. Not idea that people have used that text to otherize people as well, right? Particularly within Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think there was one more, Derek, and then we have.
I think that was it on you jumped to hang fishy, and that was my last one I saw on my end. But
okay, I just want to double check that.
Yeah, because it was after Shanties.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you might be right. I'm often wrong.
Yeah, I'm glad I screenshotted some of those because, I don't think all of them came up in your list.
No, I don't think so.
I might as well read it. It's hitting me here. Michael Beverly, thank you for the super chat. Yeah, I missed Derek's message and ended up looking foolish. Not the first time. LOL.
Yeah, he definitely didn't look foolish. Yeah, definitely didn't look foolish.
No.
There is, you're definitely not. I was in the background, but one thing I could have done differently, and I didn't, was pin a comment that stayed at the top, and it's something I'm thinking about now in future discussions. Just pin it and say, hey, we're not going to address your super chats in this stream. And in fact, this is a perfect analogy. Your frustration, Vishanti, is it Vishanti? How do you like it?
I pronounce it the way that they do in the Doctor Strange comics, which is where I took it from, is Vishanti.
Okay. Vishanti, your frustration is an exact point of what we were trying to avoid with them, because it would have in reality,
everyone else, I know.
Well, I'm not blaming you. We knew this is how we'd feel, and it was very hard. There was tension going into it, trying to keep it from getting toxic, and we knew that super chats would do that. So enough on that. Next time,
Derek said super tats.
them super tat. Constellation Pegasus. Who wants to read it?
No, you go ahead.
All right. Is Pat aware of the Galt site in Florence, Texas? Some 20,000 dates for human activity there. I don't like be far from there. Don't live far from there. I think that's what they mean to say.
I really haven't looked at the Galt site much, but I know that we're currently in anthropology, archaeology in the United States, and basically North and South America, reanalyzing, and we're starting to look at earlier dates for human migration. It used to be hard 12, 14,000, and we've pushed those dates back to, 20,000 BC.
Wow, they went to Texas?
Yeah.
On purpose.
Wow.
That's what my question is.
Jeez,
That's the only
what?
reason I would doubt it is no one voluntarily goes to Texas.
Oh my. Wow. Did they just
Honestly,
go
it's true.
did they ruin it? Did they go and ruin it and now it's crappy to go there? Is that what happened?
No. There was climactic changes. Well, I mean, remember that, 15, 20,000 years ago, you were hunting saber-tooth tigers in
Maybe
now
you
the Grand
remember
Canyon.
that. I'm a little younger than you, but
I can't hear saber-toothed tiger without seeing a person in yellow holding something out in their hand. So
I'm just saying that we had megafauna, right, at that period.
right.
And it appears that, that those populations dwindled, causing changes in how people were living in what is today that area. And I use the Grand Canyon example because it's been pretty well documented through the archaeology and paleontology of the region.
I also want to follow it up immediately with Tyrannosaurus.
Don't.
Hard Work says, is it my understanding that one of their biggest excuses for slavery is that it's moral and awesome as long as money is involved? I wouldn't want to straw man them. I know that sounds more like a joke, but no. I think it is, again, what we've been saying all along. My holy book, which is supposed to have the morals and prescriptions and descriptions, and God is kind of painting how humans should live kind of point of view. Yeah. And because there's some bad stuff in there, and we need to kind of keep this as our sacred book, which should teach us how to live our modern lives. Look, this is not like a 21st, 20th century issue. The Christians were combating the quote unquote pagans. And it wasn't because did your God do this miracle and my God didn't? The Christians just accepted much of the claims about these other pagan deities. They were arguing over the morality out the gate, philosophically dealing with the morals. Zeus raped women, this, that. And they were going, well, our guy didn't do this. And you had Marcionite types who were going, have you read the Hebrew Bible? That cannot be the God of Jesus. And like they were struggling with the same shit that we're talking about.
Probably
today.
didn't say the Hebrew Bible though.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like in the scriptures,
Maybe this is a good moment to just talk about this briefly. Like this was something that I anticipated coming up and didn't. And that is the Matthew 19 principle. And to their credit, Kipp and I said our focus is on the Hebrew Bible. So, and they didn't go into the New Testament, which
it was
mentioned
good on times.
Yeah.
But
I mean, at least that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think is interesting to note, and then we can definitely move on, is that if this Matthew 19 principle holds, if we assume it for the sake of argument, and that it does apply to slavery, I think it still leaves a very big elephant in the room. And that is that the comparison is divorce. Well, Jesus doesn't say no more divorce. Jesus says only in this situation can you divorce. So if this is the parallel, then Jesus is saying not no more slavery, only slavery in this situation. In other words, you can divorce, but you have to do it right. You can have slaves, but you have to do it right. That's the elephant in the room for me.
So I think the thing that really strikes a chord with me in the invocation of Matthew chapter 19 is that as is typical of Christian apologists, Christian apologetics, the way to make this text work is just to completely ignore the context and what's going on in the entire rest of the story and just fixate on those couple of verses, right?
I just think it's funny that
ahead.
Christians assume that in that, we'll just call it textual tradition, that Jesus is talking about monogamous unions and not the displacement of a primary wife. Like
Right.
this is the reality. Hey, if you start wanting some new hottie, don't kick your old wife to the curb. That's what the text is saying. Like, you have a responsibility and a duty to keep her around, and then bring the secondary hottie on after. Right?
So
like,
there is the whole
reality
passage
Yeah.
in the Torah where he's like, hey, if you take a young woman from another defeated foe and you bring her into your house and, you shave her head, trim her nails, whatever, and then after a while, for whatever reason, you just don't dig her that much. Well, you can't just dump her out on the street with nothing. It's like you have to give her means to support herself and like do all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, so can we talk about that, Christians? Are you going to judge that as being immoral or temporarily moral? And if it's only temporary, again, I want to reemphasize, at what point did this become immoral? Because Christianity dominated the Western Hemisphere through colonization. And it wasn't until like the middle of the 19th century that like most of the West abolished slavery. So exactly how long did it take God to wean us off of that exactly?
Yeah, I mean, I'll read a pertinent verse. If a man's first-ranking wife loses her attractiveness and becomes a paralytic, she will not be evicted from the house. However, her husband may marry a healthy wife, but the second wife shall support the first-ranking wife. Oh, sorry, that's Laws of Lipidishtar, 2018. I thought that was
nice. So, in this, when we were getting ready for this discussion, I had just recently picked up our friend Jennifer Bird's new book on biblical marriage. And she has a whole chapter in there, right? On Matthew chapter 19. So I sat down and I read through it, and she makes a couple of really, I think, salient points that are relevant to this discussion, because she notes here, well, I'll just quote a couple things. On page 52, she says, taking Jesus at his word, did you notice that the issue is not in the remarrying, not the divorcing? But the reason the remarrying is inappropriate, according to Jesus, is because that would be a form of imposing on another previous sexual relationship, not an emotional or familiar one. Adultery was a problem because a man had sex with another man's woman. Think of it as trespassing on another man's property. In both Deuteronomy 24 and Matthew 19, the conversation is concerned about intercourse and its territorial function. And then she finishes that chapter with a discussion about what happens after this exchange that Jesus has with the scribes and Pharisees, which is this whole thing, this weird thing about eunuchs, right? Because the disciples then come back to Jesus and say,
it's wow. Not that weird.
Well, yeah, for us. I mean, for them, it's not weird. I mean, but when it feels, for a lot of people, when you come to this passage, that's why people ignore it, because it feels like, what the hell is going on here, right? So the disciples come back to Jesus and say, well, if this is the case, then it's just better not to get married at all, right? And then he goes on to say, basically for those who are not married, stay unmarried. For those who are eunuchs by birth, it's good to be eunuchs. Some are made eunuchs by other men. And then he says some are made eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. And he says this is a hard teaching for anyone who can accept it. And that's kind of like that's sort of that's the climax of the passage, right? The story is about I think there's something about the urgency of apocalypticism at work here, but there's also something about that would be uncomfortable certainly for people, for apologists like Gavin and like Trent, about just I think the the nature or the futility of even making these divisions in sexual relationships in the new kingdom, right? Like it's just one of these things like this is coming, you know, so, but she finishes on this point, and I think it's a good one. On page 61, she says, the next time you hear someone refer to some part of Matthew 19:6, so they are no longer two but one flesh, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Perhaps you will have the presence of mind to ask this person if they also teach their children that it is better if they do not marry to begin with, as in Matthew 19:10-11, or perhaps you will ask them if or when they might consider castration for the sake of the kingdom. Matthew chapter 19, verse 12. Right? Like,
from half court.
It is a masterclass in missing the point of the passage. And after reading Jennifer, when I came back to this question of slavery and the invocation of Matthew 19, I'm like, honestly, when I look at that now, I mean, there's Josh's interpretation of that text, which is, you know, only this kind of slavery is okay. But I think there's another one there too, which is Jesus basically saying, forget about what the text says. The new kingdom's coming. Right?
Well,
and honestly, Christians, this is what your response should be when it comes to slavery. Like, let's stop treating the text like it's got something meaningful to say about where we are today. Let's just stop doing that.
Even if you thought that it was like eternal or whatever, nobody should be legislating our society based on 3,000-year-old text. Period. I don't care what culture it's from.
And all I would add to that,
2024.
all I would add to that,
They didn't have computers. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, the thing I would add is ritual castration was seen as an extremely positive idea of zealotry. Yes. Like, it was, again, the cult of Kybele. You know, there were numerous people, particularly in the early church. By the way, Origen self-castrated because he thought this passage in particular was what you should do as a Christian. Now, other people apologize from later, but the church actually had to outlaw self-castration because there were enough people doing it to make that there actually had to be canons over it, right? So, again, many early Christians saw that the only way to properly prepare themselves in the flesh and spiritually was to castrate themselves to remove this urge, or what was believed to cause the urge.
Do you guys find it ironic that the guys who are like super defensive, red pill, family, nuclear family, arguing online, biblical stuff, are missing Jesus's point in Matthew 19, or the author of Matthew, that the peak pinnacle, the highest achievement you can reach is eunuch. It is not getting into a family and raising kids. Apocalypticism mixed with ascetic philosophy, like Pat just described, that's that peak. And, you know, where's the following of that? Why aren't we all becoming eunuchs?
The next level past black pill? Is this like Vanta black pill?
Well, and this goes like, against be fruitful and multiply.
Be eunuch and celibate for your life. Yeah. That's the real thing. They aren't telling you.
Yep. And don't be fruitful and multiply. I'm sorry, I stepped on you.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, right. Continuing. Michael Beverly. Sorry, that was a fun one, but okay. Why did Christians support slavery for about 1,800 years? Obviously, the Bible supported slavery to most Christians in most of history. No?
I mean, this is just it, right? Like, the only reason there's apologetics for slavery is because there's no clear, like or I should say, because the rules and the text is pretty clear on this issue.
And there was constant debate. Like, one of the major divisions in the Eastern and Western churches after about the 6th century was pertaining to issues. Some of them included slavery, and then there were various pronouncements made in various kingdoms, like you can't enslave Christians, right? So I'm not going to say that Christianity's been wrestling with this from the foundation of Christianity. You know, again, you can pick out a few people that were abolitionists early on, And then you can talk about, pre-Christian abolitionists as well, if you want to consider that. But they were gauging more of, philosophical thought, like even whether or not slavery is immoral in itself. But, this was an argument through the church, and the Eastern church supported slavery as an institution much longer than the Western church did in for much of the medieval period. But this was a tension. It wasn't always outlawed. It went through refinements, like who's it okay to have as a slave? And then the church said, well, just don't have every slave convert to Christianity, because then they'll get an out, right? So they have to serve a certain amount of time as a slave before they're a good Christian who needs to be released, right? So there were different regions of quote unquote the former Roman Empire that were dealing with it as well. So it's a nuanced discussion.
Thank you. Taylor, would it be true to say Paul thinks he is a debt slave of Jesus, so has to serve him?
No,
I don't think
would think he would
No.
consider himself to be a chattel slave.
No,
Yeah.
so Paul's engaging in what whoever, again, Paul's engaging in some stoicism here. What is it to be a slave? Like the Stoics approached it, that there were slaves that were slaves by nature, and that would be natural slavery. There were slaves that people were slaves to their lust. Now the Stoics would say no one is truly a slave by their nature. They would say they rejected that Aristotelian concept. But was it slaves because of a misfortune of fate? Like you were born a slave, right? That you yourself, all people are equal, but now there's this mistake of history, so to speak. Then the Stoics, or could you be slave to sin, like lust? Like the Stoics thought, like, hey, if you're a glutton, you're a slave to food, right? And then there's this idea, if you're a slave to people that are societally greater than you as well. So like the Stoics were analyzing this in multiple ways either. So Paul was probably engaging that kind of thought at different levels. Like when he's talking about Jesus, he's talking about being slave to a divinity, which the Stoics wouldn't have had a problem with, acknowledging a force that was greater than yours. Like again, I don't want to get into Stoicism too much, but there are other schools of thought that would have had similar thoughts as well, philosophical schools.
Thank you. I'm just reading here. I'm not commenting. Michael Beverly, do y'all have an opinion on they were her property? And thank you for both super chats. It's 2 in a row.
Oh, wow. I think he sent those to different channels.
Okay.
They were her property.
I don't know the context. Do you?
If you're still in the chat, Michael, and you can provide us a little bit of context, that would be great. Because I'm not picking it up.
I think he's referring to a book written in 2019.
Was it by?
I have not read it, by Stephanie Jones Rogers. They were her property, white women as slave owners in the American South.
Have any of you guys read it?
I have not. I'm just aware of it. I did not read it.
Oh, okay.
That's what that is. Okay.
Josh, you're muted.
I just bought it. It's sitting on my shelf
Oh.
downstairs in the queue.
Perfect.
And I bought it.
Oh,
I bought it because I saw it on Michael Beverly's channel.
hey, nice.
Good.
Not that I
Thank
watch
you.
this stuff.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Michael. Milwaukee Atheist is back. Josh looking like Dapper. Kipp looking like Dino.
Is that? I'm starting to feel really sensitive about my age since I turned 51. Is that a dig?
You just got to put a bow tie on. That's
You're
all it
still
is.
spring chicken,
That's
bro.
it. That's it. Alpha Centurion in the house. Thank you so much for the super. Here's the one with some words here. Who's Germania? P.S. I dig Pat.
Archaeology.
I dig Pat.
Very fun. Yeah.
Speaking of which, you gave me a bunch of coins. I still need to clean up, Pat.
You really do.
I actually think I haven't watched it yet, but I actually think Alpha Centurion did a review of our discussion, literally like right after it happened. But yeah, people should check it out.
And I've talked to Alpha a lot on stuff like this. And Alpha, he's knowledgeable of early church history. I don't think he's gonna engage in. I mean, he's Catholic though. I want to call him super Catholic, but he'd call himself super Catholic. SC on his chest, flies around.
hard work regarding the treatment of slaves in the Bible, did they say whether they think anything biblically permitted was also morally good?
Honestly, that was the essence of their argument.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and
Sort of.
there were a lot of things that in my notes we're not going to cover today, but one thing that kind of always gets talked about is the integration into a household. That happened everywhere. That was just the standard, particularly for domestic slaves.
And just there was the whole thing about you can go to the other nations and buy your slaves. Why didn't we just harp on that one for an hour? That would have been great. Because I would have loved to see them be like, well, I mean, it's fine if you're not one of God's people to go buy slaves. Die on that hill.
But that's why
No, go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, that's why when I brought up what I thought was going to be the mic drop of Exodus 21, 28 to 32, and how, free man, free woman, lex talionis,
you
death,
fool!
right? Son, daughter, death, right? Slave, 30 shekels of silver to the master. That one, I was and then it was just it seemed to have very little effect, which
it disappeared into the ether.
I didn't know what to do.
The
old rubber and glue defense just bounced right off them.
I have a rule. If I've underlined something 3 times, it means I thought it was important. And in my notes, I have this underlined 3 times, making sure we cover it.
Gosh.
We need to talk about slave taking, quote unquote, kidnapping.
We get through these real quick.
Thank you.
Okay, right.
Yes.
Then we'll go.
I do want to try and get through these. We don't want to leave any money on the table. Yeah, you know what I mean. We got to go through this so that we get everybody happy. Oh, sorry. Michael Beverly says the French go everywhere, usually up to no good.
I don't know what that means.
I think
I'm not going to say anything.
French imperial period, especially going into Mexico.
I mean, Spain. Hello.
Yeah. Taylor, would it be reasonable to say Yahweh sent the Israelites to be slaves in Egypt to store them, to later use them to punish people?
Damn.
No.
Depends on your perception, right? If you take William Lane Craig's view, he's being as merciful as he possibly can.
Yeah.
But also, use them to punish people later. They didn't do a great job. Their land was never very big, and they lost a lot of battles, and they lost to basically every empire in the region. So who did they punish exactly?
You got to go back to the prehistorical.
Yeah, but given what we know of slavery in Egypt at this time period, New Kingdom, vassalage for military service was probably what actually happened. The fact you need food, you become a vassal, you have to supply troops and corvée labor. I think most people think of them being in these slave compounds in the Delta, right? Again, there's a lot of evidence to show that Egypt was relying on a lot of these vassal kingdoms because they were repeatedly penetrating in that region to form labor units and military units under Egyptian control. So
that whole strip of land going from where the Nile Delta is up until Syria, that is prime fishing territory. A lot of that land is very fertile. So of course they wanted to control it. That's where all the good shit is.
Well, they did control it for 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
Susan Cameron says, what's striking to me about Matthew is that adultery is conceived of as an offense against a woman. I have not heard of this anywhere in the ancient world. Have any of you? It wouldn't shock me in a patriarchal society if that's how they... But is adultery conceived?
An offense?
I don't think I've ever read it that way, but
I don't.
I'm reading it backwards. I'm thinking against the man that the woman at.
Well, that's normal, yeah, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know Matthew well enough to make that call.
I don't even
there
know.
There have been other matriarchal societies, not in the West, that you could look at, but
I guess the question would be, if you cheated on your wife in Rome, in the Greco-Roman society, would that have been not with just some concubine, but I don't know, in some, it was
considered, if it was publicly known, it was considered bad form to
Right.
have public liaisons. And I don't think really Matthew is saying his adultery is against an offense against a woman. I think
Yeah.
Matthew's saying
He's
that
not.
if the offense occurs, these are the minimum standards that must be maintained. You can't kick her out of the house. Like,
But
just-
importantly
like-
too, importantly too,
quote
the thing
Malachi?
the thing that Jesus says is whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery, right? So like there's a few things going on there, but I don't see it specifically as an offense against the woman.
I do not know how to pronounce this. Gareed,
Yeah.
Desane, eunuchs. Why
I would
Christian?
have read that as Jared, but could be wrong.
Got out of the sign.
Correct me in the chat.
Eunuchs. Why Christian opposition to asexuals is crazy.
Yeah,
Good
it's
point.
interesting, right?
Yep.
Do they go after asexuals as much as they do homosexuals? Because I don't normally see that.
I don't know.
Well,
know.
I'll be very honest. Early Christianity aestheticism was often seen as a rejection of sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
sexuality.
Plus, it's like, well, if Jesus is coming back in 5 minutes, what's the point of having kids? That was kind of Paul's.
Not just having
shtick.
kids, but not having sex.
But
like,
not having
you
sex at
can't-
all, unless like
Right.
if you just can't control yourself, I guess get married.
Jesus, if you will just come, everything will be better. Anyway, fatal heart. I'm sorry. God can do all things. They just want their snake oil sellable. Quote, if I was still trying to please men, I would no longer be a servant of Christ. End quote.
Well,
Thank you. And Hard Work says, can you read this chat? Thank you, Hard Work.
A shot at me. Like, am I able to read? Yes, I can read. No.
Thank you so much. I know that Josh has to go here in a minute, and I get the hints. Trust me, I know you too well. So we need to address this topic that Pat was bringing up because I thought that was an important one. You mentioned it earlier, Pat, but I just wanted us to push through.
One of the biggest peeves I have over the whole thing is they keep talking like kidnapping, like in the modern context. It's not. Like kidnapping is slave taking. Like that's how this text is set up. It could be grabbing one person, but this is also in many ways, an enterprise of going into another region and taking many people, right? So yes, it can happen on the individual, one person at a time, but slave taking and kidnapping are synonymous in these texts. It is not like slave taking is separate than kidnapping in this text. We shouldn't use the word kidnapping. We should use slave taking. And that could be slave taking of one person, which would be kidnapping, or slave taking of many people, which would be like multiple acts of kidnapping, which would just be slave taking. And the fact that it keeps being framed so ahistorically really pisses me off. Every society I'm aware of in the ancient Mediterranean, and I'm aware of a lot of them, had laws against this. Like, again, the bad Romans that got brought up as the worst form of slavery had laws that it is illegal for slave takers to operate outside of the Roman Empire unless formal legislation of war had been enacted in the Republican period by the Senate or during the time of the emperors by the emperor himself. So you couldn't just go into other places where there are different people than us and just grab people, right? Like, and you could be crucified for being a known and convicted slave trader. So the Romans thought it was a crime worthy of death. And it's not just kidnapping, like, hey, I'm going to grab this person, hold them for a few days. No, it's subjecting them to slavehood, representing them as a slave, putting them into a slave market. If you got caught doing that in many of the places in the ancient Mediterranean at different times, you were going to be tried and executed.
Didn't they try to
prison for life,
also?
things like that.
Didn't they also try to say something along the lines of Israel was like the safe haven where everyone could escape their slavery and like be free? And they said something to that effect. Did you guys have any comment on that?
I mean, it's a war tactic, right? I mean, outside of just this being a non-extradition clause, you if they know that if you can get your their people to come over to your side, that's a good thing, right? But I did want to read something.
It's real estate.
Yeah. I wanted to read something, and this is from Pat, you like this, that Damian Pargas article out of that Palgrave Slavery Handbook.
Okay.
After the 1808 ban in the antebellum South, quote, illegally transporting enslaved Africans was a serious offense that not only violated federal laws, but also international treaties with Great Britain, whose navy regularly patrolled the Atlantic and seized ships that contained human cargo bound for the Americas. The offense carried with it the death penalty. On the same page,
Where
a
was
second
that?
method, it's in this the Palgrave handbook on
Yeah, what year was the
slavery.
legislation?
1808. After
Huh.
the 1808 ban.
And that means slavery after 1808 was completely moral and good. But go ahead.
A second method
wasn't
of
Civil War in like the 1860s?
Yeah, isn't that weird? A second method of illegal enslavement in the age of the second slavery entailed kidnapping free blacks and selling them into slavery in the southern states. It closes the section or this part with this. Slaveholders in this era of the second slavery ironically developed an ideology of master-slave relations that scholars have dubbed paternalism, a concept that refers to white Southern admonitions to take good care of enslaved people, whom they frequently referred to as my people or even my black family, so that threats and violence would be unnecessary.
Because in addition to that, they feared servile insurrection, just like the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians and all
And
these
the Haitians.
They were worried. Again, I agree with you 100%, Josh, about this non-extradition thing, but typically I guarantee you, and I'm sure we'll find a source somewhere, if there was an extradition treaty, it was enforced, right? But in times of war, letting the next country over's people know that if you make it to my country, you'll be free, not only was economic hardship, it fomented servile insurrection in those countries to weaken them, because slaves have to escape. And how do you escape? You either sneak away or kill whoever's watching you. Those are the two ways you do it. And, that's...
This whole thing makes it full circle for me in what Josh is trying to drive home, more so than I think Kipp even, because Kipp's not that you're not into this topic, but this is Josh's thing.
I haven't written 2 books about it.
No.
It does this to make me happy. That's what happens.
Absolutely.
That's why he puts up with it.
But your point about they try to act like, well, at the very outside of this debate, they wanted to go, yeah, but then they got the skeptics who just want to say it's antebellum South slavery. And I could see Josh's mouth going, I don't think you're paying attention to my points of how actually this is comparable. Nobody's saying it's an identical situation and every little facet of it is exactly the same, but laws, and they said this, they confessed this much in that discussion. Laws are just, they're like standards of expectation, not what's actually happening and stuff.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Pat.
All I'm going to say is the one big, and Josh and I've talked about this before, the one big distinction between the slavery of the antebellum South and the slavery in the ancient Mediterranean is one's race-based and one's ethnically based. And that's it. That's those are the systems. There's a reason Romans didn't allow their citizens to be enslaved.
But also they don't think of ethnos and race like we do.
I agree, Vishanti, but I'm
those
saying
are anachronistic.
Correct. And so this argument, well, it was racist. Well, right, because we developed in Western society this concept of race way after the Mediterranean people had this. It's awful.
That's a good point. And in every example Josh gives, where it's just, let me show you very merciful sounding laws. And we know, because we're so close to, we have a memory of what happened in antebellum South slavery, or even just American slavery period, because it wasn't just in the South. We know what happened, and yet the laws say certain things. The laws say certain things in the Bible. We're going to pretend, give it the best favor possible. It's just, I get what you're saying, Josh, and I don't think they see that at all.
Plus, laws don't mean anything if no one's enforcing them.
But it does tell you a lot when you have them saying what we said earlier, tooth, eye. Well, does this not imply hitting somehow? I mean, is this not at least giving the hint that, all right, we know with your slaves, you're going to have to whip them here and there. Just don't lose your temper and beat the absolute dog crap out of them. Like, I mean, is it not implied there? Would I be wrong in assuming that, Josh, Kipp?
No, that's correct. I think that's what specifically what the law is trying to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That reminds me of something that Trent said toward the end when he was like, "Oh, you guys were so nice. That was great." He said that he used to tell people that he would never talk about slavery or debate slavery with atheists, which unspoken was like trying to dunk on atheist morality. But that comment when he was like, "Oh yeah, you guys kind of changed my mind on this, like, because you were so nice," and I was laughing that he said that, because imagine thinking arguing on the pro-slavery side meant that you had the high ground.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm not going to debate people on this because he thought he had the high ground. Good job,
I don't
Trent.
think it was a debate, though. Kipp and Josh were not. They were purposefully
Sorry,
not trying
the
to
discussion.
Right.
My bad.
And I think that's why he had a good.
too.
His experience turned out good. Is it wasn't. They were trying to avoid that. Anyway, a couple more supers. We got to let Josh go. It's past his bedtime. Are you kidding me?
He gets to sleep in tomorrow, though, guys.
I already know he's got to go.
Yeah, you've got 5 kids that are going to get up at 5 a.m.
Oh man,
I'm going to blast through these.
Kick him out of the house, dude. That's what I did.
Taylor, thank you for the super chat. My question was that what literally occurred, but is that what Yahweh is telling Abraham his plan is in Genesis 15?
I guess in a manner of speaking.
Yeah.
I like to point out to people though that the constant reminder of Israel's bondage in Egypt is not as a way of saying slavery is bad and I had to get you out of slavery because it's bad. It's because Abraham, in that passage, it specifically says that your descendants will dwell as a ger. They're going to be sojourners in the land, and for them to have been enslaved was a grave injustice that Yahweh was correcting. And
Kipp, your
also,
strongest moment by far was when you said, "Hey, God had a problem with slavery when it was his people because Egyptians didn't have a claim over his people." That was so strong.
It went right over their heads, though.
Whoosh. Yep. And Gavin even was like, "Well, no, I don't think that's right." And
did he say that? I mean, it was at the very end.
may as well just argue with the wall at that point.
Ronan of Stag, you get
man.
salvation for that $3 super chat, my friend.
One of my members there.
Yep. Hard work. Forgot to say thanks for Hebrew class. Will this get me an A?
Absolutely. That's how I roll.
This is Josh's class, right? Of course it'll get you an A.
Yeah.
Michael Beverly, thank you again for all the super chats and love showering on
that's a good
these
comment.
wonderful people. After 1808, the Americans followed. The price of fertile women went up, per the book I mentioned. And Vishanti, the slave trade outlawed before 13th Amendment.
13th.
And what's interesting about this, and I do have to go, but like what's interesting about this is that treatment of slaves following the 1808 law improved. But it's not because people suddenly got like humane. It was, well, slaves aren't so easily replaceable now. So we have to treat the ones that we have well.
Oh,
Don't
right.
break your car. Don't ruin your vehicle. If you can't buy another vehicle, you're going to take better care of the one you have as best you can because they're property. You're using them for work, for labor.
And this is another thing I think it may help Josh, not help, but it'll add on to Josh's argument. In 1829, Mexico banned slavery.
Yep.
If you guys remember your history, Texas is part of
I'm a
Mexico.
Canadian.
Right. Texas is part of Mexico. Texas one of the motivating factors for Texas fighting Mexico was the preservation of slavery, because Santa Anna had given them an additional year till 1830 to actually stop the practice, right? When they formed their own constitution after their own Declaration of Independence from Mexico, in 1835, their constitution specifically supported the practice as it had been prior to 1829. So, like, when people talk about how this was going through and used, the American psyche was part of the motivation for the Alamo wasn't Mexico bad, white colonists good. It was the preservation of the institution of slavery, which the white colonists of Texas were bringing in as a method to have production. They were like, wait a minute, in the South where we're coming from, we have this. You can't take it away. And Mexico was, for the time, again, ending in 1829, they're ending it.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah. And also not fun trivia is in 1820, that's when the Spanish Inquisition was closed in Mexico. So for all you folks that think that was long ago and far away, no, that was like 5 minutes ago in history time. Yep.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Ronan of Stag, a couple more California bucks to fight versus slavery with
Canadian
coffee.
bucks.
Canadian
California bucks.
California bucks are amazing.
California buck. I mean,
I think California bucks are worth more than Canadian dollars.
They are
too.
worth more money than
they are.
Eric Wonder, thanks for being a member for 2 months. Hi, Kipp, Derek, Vishanti, Josh, and Pat. I got nothing to ask. LOL. So I'm just going to say I'm proud to be a Metal Lord, Mudkip, Diachronic.
Those are my emojis. They're super cool, guys.
Diacritic is the best. Diacritic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any final words as we wrap up?
No, thank you both.
Buy Josh's book. Buy
Kipp's
Kipp's books.
Yes, agreed.
No, please don't buy my books, because you'll go into poverty doing so, and I don't get anything from them anyways. Download my books for free. Buy Josh's books. I will have a book that you can buy soon, but all the other ones, just go get them.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.